My name is William Usher. I'm the Senior Director for Intelligence here at SCSB. And we are here to have the first of two discussions today about how large data and advanced technologies like artificial intelligence are going to impact the world of intelligence, which is my background. Before joining SCSB last year, I spent 32 years with CIA as an intelligence analyst and colleague to some of the folks here on our panel. And we're here to talk about open source intelligence. And I think most of the people that I see in the seats here probably already know what OSINT is. But for the benefit of those who are just joining us for the first time, in the intelligence world, we refer to OSINT, open source intelligence, is all of that information that is unclassified, publicly or commercially available. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And I am very pleased to welcome a very esteemed panel of experts to help us talk about it. To my immediate left is Kristin Wood. Kristin is CEO and co-founder of August Interactive, which is a technology-forward gaming studio focused on creating immersive gaming experiences using artificial intelligence, artificial reality, and virtual reality technologies. Prior to starting this company, she spent 20 years at CIA, where she served in the directors area and 3 of the directorates in the agency, including the Directorate of Analysis, Operations, and Digital Innovation, including a stint at what was then called the Open Source Enterprise. And she has become a leading voice on OSINT since her retirement. Jason Barrett is the first Intelligence Community OSINT executive in the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, where he supports the enterprise-wide synchronization and coordination of the intelligence community's OSINT mission, including establishing counterintelligence policies and standards for the use of OSINT by the IC. Mr. Barrett has 2 decades of experience in the IC working asymmetric threats as an all-source analyst, advisor, and leader. And in his previous role, he served as the Deputy Director of the Cyber Threat Intelligence Integration Center. Welcome, Jason. Randy Nixon, in addition to being my former boss, currently serves as the Director of CIA's Open Source Enterprise in the CIA's Directorate of Digital Innovation. Prior to this role, he led DDI's Digital Futures team with the mission of finding private sector solutions to mission needs. Randy came to the DDI after serving as the Deputy and then Director of the Office of Advanced Analytics and the Directorate of Analysis. And finally, Mr. Staffan Truvé is co-founder and Chief Technology Officer of Recorded Future, a company specializing in threat intelligence. Staffan has co-founded more than a dozen high-tech startups. He is a founding partner of AI Sweden, a national center for applied AI with a mission to accelerate the use of AI to benefit society. I can't think of a better team to join me today for this discussion. So, Kristin, I'm going to start with you and ask if you could sort of set the stage for us. A lot of discussion about open source over the last decade. We've got dozens of companies here that are showing off their capabilities. But what are some of the large trends going on right now in OSINT? And why should the intelligence community care about them?
Thank you. So really happy to be here today to talk with all of you and with my esteemed colleagues. So I think for me, I want to start kind of very big picture, which is thinking about all of this within the way the world has changed. And so we think about industrial revolutions, right? So the first industrial revolution is really all about getting to steam engines. And then the second one really is we're getting to manufacturing. So those 2 times, it's 170 years it takes for that to happen. And then we move into the computer, this amazing thing. It takes about 50 years for that to happen. And then into the internet, it takes 30 years for that to happen. And then the world is changing every single time there's a revolution. So internet gets us there 30 years. Now, 20 years later, we're in this world where it's the internet of things, human brain interfaces, and that's happened within 20 years. So the world is changing faster as technology advances. We all know that. but how fast these revolutions are happening is really, really important framework, because as we're conducting our missions, especially in the government, to be able to move at that scale becomes really challenging. So at the same time, what that has allowed is interconnectivity that's never seen before. 90% of Americans have a cell phone. About 2/3 of the world has cell phones. So this is creating a tremendous amount of data, not only from their mobile communications, but all the interconnectivity of systems around the world. Well, so what has that created? In the last 2 years, 90% of the world's data has been created. In the last 2 years. In the next 2 years, it's going to increase again by 50%. So this open data world is massive, well outscales the world of classified, and it's continuing to grow and expand because it's interconnected and data talks to data, creates new data, and unlimited by the tools and now aided by generative and other kinds of AI, that speed is going to continue to develop. So, in that environment, I think we're talking volumes, right? So if 1 byte of data is a grain of rice, if you have 1 zettabyte of data, it's like the Pacific Ocean full of rice. We're producing 120 zettabytes of data now. So if you think about that, it's going to be 180 zettabytes of data. So 180 Pacific Oceans, just for context, right? So in this world where the problem has gotten beyond human scale, it's the tools and the support and the ability to move at scale and mission that becomes really important. So that's just kind of the chapeau maybe for starting the discussion.
Perfect. Thank you. So let's turn to Jason, who's solving this for the intelligence community as the first IC OSINT director. I'm just going to quote a line from what Jason's office just published, which is the first IC-wide OSINT strategy. And I can find it here. Of course, I'm losing my notes, so I'll let you quote from it. Could you tell us a bit about the strategy and what the goals are?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, the strategy was done jointly with Randy's team. And really, I think what the message that we wanted to convey, not just to our intelligence community partners, but really to the public, was how the IC is looking at open source intelligence in a macro way and also in a strategic way over the next couple of years. And what does that really mean? Well, if you look at the D&I's quote at the forefront of the strategy, what you'll see is really her belief that we all share, that open source intelligence is transformative and will be transformative to how the intelligence community does analysis and collection, and really undergirds a lot of what we do across the board, across all intelligence disciplines. The problem over the years has been that people saw the value of open source intelligence, but really during the CT days, there was a desire and a need for certain types of information in a much more efficient way to do, to accomplish outcomes that really didn't necessarily make sense in an open source environment. What we've really gone through over the last couple of years, as Kristin underscored, we're reaching an inflection point. And the inflection point is such that commercial and publicly available data is so powerful and is so foundational to what we are trying to accomplish that it's really going to be that information that drives a lot of the intelligence community's capabilities. And that can be a collection architecture, or that can be the analytic output. But it is going to be that data that serves as that foundational level. And so what we're trying to do now is really position ourselves over the next couple of years to be at a point at which we are not wasting resources holding all of that data, but that we're able to actually be in a better position to more rapidly bring on board different types of commercial data. We're able to leverage tools and capabilities that really Randy, I know, will talk about. And we're able to really benefit from not just what we're able to kind of create internally, but the strategy talks about how we really want to partner more closely with innovators, in the the American and like-minded country space, where these are the brilliant minds that are going to be bringing to the forefront the technologies that are going to help us really deliver success from a decision standpoint. And the strategy really speaks to, from a foundational level, how we want to get there over the next couple of years.
Perfect. Thank you, Jason. So let's dig into the technology a little bit. Randy, you took over OSC in late 2022.
Yep.
And right from the outset, you emphasized the use of advanced technologies based on your prior work experience. Last year, I think we saw some press reporting that OSC is now deploying a chat GPT-like capability. How's that going, and how is it making an impact on intelligence work?
Yeah, the greatest weakness for OSINT is that our collection is so massive that no person can read through it and pay attention to everything that we're collecting. So we may be in a data revolution. I think we're in the OSINT renaissance because of what technology is bringing to us. And what we have done is taking generative AI, and we're bringing it to solving our problem with the scale of our collection. Now, we can do that because this renaissance is taking you through 4 phases. That first phase started a decade ago. That was in the very early days of machine translation. That's the very beginning of this process of bringing AI to OSINT. And at the very beginning of that, OSC, my predecessors who were there, moved it to a phase that we had our data ready to be able to take advantage of these greater AIs that have come after it. So we'd already started making that journey. We were already in the cloud. We were already tagging our information. I started in December of 22, and in January of 23, some of my officers came to me and said that they wanted to try auto summarization. Chat didn't exist yet. It hadn't been announced publicly. And I said, sure, let's try it. We had a 1-year plus up of resources, so we actually could afford to experiment. Shortly thereafter, the large chat GPT, and I said, we have a chat GPT-like function, but OpenAI did their announcement. So we started looking into what we could do using that. By September, we deployed our new open source interface to OSC. And in this October, we rolled it out to the entire intelligence community. So what we're able to do in this phase, the second phase of our renaissance, is auto summarization as events are happening. So pick any event that's going on today, the Rafa boarding crossing. We may have thousands of different documents that in the past OSC or DA analysts would have to read. Now it is automatically summarizing and sourcing that summary. And then we can take it to the next level, and using the chat GPT-like function, we can ask questions of our data from that event and get source answers back. Then from then, we're also able to take our information and slice it in ways and at speeds that we never could have even foresaw. So if I want to know what Russia is saying about a particular event inside of Russia, within just by a nice sort, I can have that answer in seconds. Would have taken us days in the past. If I want to know what they're saying to an external audience, because we want to see the differences, like this, we have the answer now. The second phase we're also in is transforming our production. So we have our new production system is tied to these tools. So we now can come in and say, oh, well, these are the most important documents, send them to my production system. I would say we have probably the world's best prompt engineering in the entire world today, because we've been working on this. We have some prompts that are 20 pages long. We hit the prompt, it automatically produces the first draft of our product. And then it's the human machine team to get it ready to actually put out the door. And the fourth phase that we're just starting on is the ability for the machine to be able to do more streaming analytics and automated warning. That's out there. It's possible. It's just the next step that we have to bring into the system. So AI and technology is completely transforming the OSINT world.
Randy, before we leave you, let me just do a quick follow-up question. So you said prepared drafts. So we're not at the stage yet where OSC's actually just hitting the button and sending product to the President of the United States or something like that.
There's no will be out of the loop. It was very important to us that the machine could source its summaries. So we knew the provenance of where the information was coming from. We have to still check those sources. And there's still the human intuition. I mean, our officers speak 60 plus languages. They have lots of overseas and cultural experience. We still have to add those flavors back into it. But it takes we called officers in last weekend to handle an event. We working with our mission centers. We told them, plan to be there all day. It was 2 people. They came in and they were actually gone within an hour.
Fantastic.
It's a different world.
That wasn't my experience in some crises I worked.
No.
Thank you. Staffan, let me turn to you next. So your company has been at the forefront of developing AI and applying it to large data sets. Recorded Futures had a pretty good track record in some recent crises. Can you talk a little bit about your company's experience and how you're delivering value to customers?
Yeah, I mean, if you look back, and I love Kristin's introduction here, because when we started back in 2009, it was really based on three observations. First of all, as you said, the mobile phones were finally making all us humans sensors, serving the machines with information, way too much information. The second one was cloud technology, meaning that it was affordable for a startup to actually go out and build the infrastructure to do this. And the third was really, in 2007, also the emergence of modern day AI. The first deep learning papers were published that year as well. So we saw the opportunity and the necessity to combine these three to do this at scale. And then we sort of followed the four phases you mentioned. Essentially, started out using AI, deep learning to organize all the information. Second phase, reporting. Third phase, really enabling the dialogue between the human analysts and the machines. And then the fourth phase, which I think we're just at the beginning of now, is automation. And I would sort of corroborate to what you said. I think, for reporting, we absolutely today need humans in the loop. I think for other cases where we use intelligence to, say, automatically protect our systems, there we're at the point now that we need to have that be fully automated, because humans in the loop will be too slow to actually stop attacks at the moment. But otherwise, I think it's exciting. I think it's exciting today that we're sort of seeing governments and the private sector working along the same lines and more collaborating. We're working today with 46 governments worldwide, and it's in essence, we're creating a shared platform for open source intelligence, which I think is the other interesting part, that the good side of the world are joining together to sort of amass the resources needed to do this.
Terrific. Now, it's not always easy for the U.S. federal government to work with private sector companies, but as we're learning from what Kristin said earlier, and just looking around our expo here, companies are creating those grains of sand that are adding up to the Pacific Ocean's worth of data. So it's going to require, I would think, a different approach to partnership. Kristin, any thoughts based on your experience, both in government and out, on how that partnership needs to evolve?
Yeah. So I think we are at this moment where it's transformational, and I think that's what we're all saying. And so it's really, what does government decide it must do, right? What is the purview of government? And then within that, absolutely focusing on that. There's the tie to classified information. There's how to use unclassified, but what can be outsourced? And then there's this rich body of hundreds of phenomenal companies that have slices of this, whether that's threat intelligence or narrative intelligence or looking at cyber. So there's so much out there that's being done, where there's great open source experts, phenomenal data, capable people and teams. And so it's not like in the old days where, when I'll speak for myself. In the old days when you could go and set up a relationship with a company and do a 1-on-1 contract or a 10-on-1 contract or a 20-on-1 contract. So it's really thinking is, how do we have set up relationships where there's 2 or 3 or 4 or 500 companies that have value to bring to the open source space, and the licensing and the data structuring and the fees all work in a way that feed for government, but are all tied in to mission priorities. And I think we're at a moment where that is very much needed, right? So pulling that data so it's available to Randy and Jason, their teams and their missions, but doing so in a way that's rigorous for government, and it's rigorous for the best practices in the private sector, which evolves so quickly. And I think those companies, in addition to groups like Bellingcat, which have done remarkable work, just inventing things out of whole cloth, there's so much dynamism that we see in the private sector that I know that marrying that up with the expertise and dynamism within government, we're actually about to take just this massive shift if it gets resourced.
Go ahead, Randy.
I said that's the second phase of this renaissance, is the explosion of the private sector moving into the ocean space and the availability of commercially available information. There is a ton of great things, and I say the private sector, or I also sometimes call the capitalist patriots. It's amazing what's there. It also scares me because I think the next Intel failure could easily be an OSINT failure because there's so much out there. Even if now that I have the machines that can take advantage of it all, we don't have the ability to take advantage of it all because the commercial available side, you have to be able to purchase it. Time and time again, we find data sets and partners that we really enjoy working with, that we find very valuable. And the next contract cycle comes through, and now it's doubled the price it was before because we found it valuable. So we have to break that cycle, and I think it's some of what Chris is talking about. We also have to have a different trade craft of our contracting. This OSC, and Jason can talk about this too, we don't just serve CIA. Our mandate is to work through the National Open Source Committee and to serve the entire intelligence community. So private sector likes to sell by license. Well, that immediately makes that nearly impossible for us because of the large scale of users that we have when you add all of the IC and DoD's IC elements as well. So we have to have new ways of doing those contractors to deliver our information. We're making hard choices already today between data sets we have that we can keep and data sets that we want to buy, and have a very large list of things that are on the wish list beyond those two lists.
Okay, Randy, that sounds expensive.
It is.
Okay, so is the OSINT community and the IC resourced sufficiently for the mission?
I would say very diplomatically that the OSINT community is part of the entire intelligence community, that people way above me make the resources, decisions to balance across what the entire IC needs are.
Okay.
So can I say less diplomatically? So the National Security Act was created 3.5 industrial revolutions ago. That's the one that invented the whole intelligence community. And at the time, open source was, a very tiny piece of it. Well, fast forward and we have our adversaries. If you have 1 million open source officers in China focused against us, and you have data moving at speed and volume with people who are pushing it against us, we're seeing what's happened in the narratives. We're seeing what's happened in our own mis and disinformation, right? So Randy's team, I actually think, I was thinking about this. We need a Caitlin Clark era. For those of you who follow NC2A basketball, right? Title IX so long ago said basically men's sports, women's sports, you have to fund both. Everyone said, no, it's all about men's sports. Well, fast forward to this moment where actually women's sports is making more money, bringing more eyeballs. And I think a little bit of that's the classified secret world versus the world of the open, is there's this moment where we've got to protect some resources so that it can grow to what it can be, because it's going to be powering what's generations forward.
Right. Staffan, I think you raised your finger.
Yeah, I think,
then we'll go to Jason.
Yeah, no, I think exactly what you said here. I think as a commercial supplier of OSINT, you have to be flexible and understand that when you're selling to governments, the scale of that, you have to price it appropriately. On the other hand, I think overall, we should all be winning on this, because by doing it on the commercial scale and sharing it, as I said, between multiple countries, for example, we're actually helping sort of pull the costs for a lot of the infrastructure necessary. And then it's important, as Kristin said, to ensure that you have the correct division between the low end and high end of data, but I think by getting commercial support for the low end, you can actually allocate more resources to the high end. And the challenge is then, how do we build these interfaces between let's call it the commercial AIs and the ones you build in-house, for example?
Yeah.
I think, what's really important here is it's not up to the commercial sector at this point to come to us. It's up to the government to start to change how we do our business. We have to change our model, our approach, our way of obtaining information, our way of purchasing information. And that's going to take a real big, not just a shift when it comes to the IC, but it's going to also take a whole lot of support from other parts of the government in order to make that happen. And so I think in order to get those resources that others have talked about, it can't just be us who talks about it. It's got to be the Hill. It's got to be others. It's got to be you. And ultimately, when you look at the return on investment that we can get and deliver to policymakers, compared to other parts of, the IC, we're talking about a pretty significant opportunity here to deliver really great outcomes for policymakers, decision makers, for warfighters, without having to spend an enormous amount of taxpayer dollars. And I think that's really important, that message. And again, it's not up to the private sector at this point to come to us. It's up to the government to start to change its mindset.
Thank you, Jason. And let's give this a little bit of scale if we can. So, 18 IC agencies, thousands of analysts who want to benefit from what is now commercially available, publicly available, and that data space is exploding. But does every agency, every office within every agency need to purchase Staffan's data or subscriptions to Bloomberg? Is there some more innovative solutions out there, or do we need to have an outright OSINT agency that only does this work?
Well, it starts with that tradecraft of writing a contract in a way that you purchase it once and you share across the community. And we've been adapting that and pushing that. Jason and I both work on this at the IC level to ensure that as at minimum, when a different agency buys something, that there's a CLIN available in that contract that somebody else can turn on and take advantage of at minimum. But at best, we want to purchase once, automatically be able to share across the platform.
So I think it's important. This matters for a variety of reasons, not just from a resourcing perspective, but it's also going to help from a transparency perspective. It's going to help for privacy protection. With privacy protection, it's going to help speed the delivery of information. And I think you're going to see more information coming out from the IC very soon on commercially available information and kind of the policy that we're approaching the use of that information with. So I think that's important for you all to understand. And frankly, it's important for us to be transparent about how we are applying a policy framework to that information. But also, and this gets to my previous remarks and what Randy was talking about, we really do need a mindset shift when it comes to how we are acquiring it so that we're not taking 18 different approaches and then, having to set up the contracts 18 different ways. Hopefully, ultimately, so that we can share internally. There are ways in which we could get to a more streamlined acquisition process here that won't require taking money from other agencies, but actually doing this in a more streamlined way and allowing the data to flow where it needs to go instead of, and also keeping it on the unclassified fabric. What that will ultimately allow us to do is deliver information for intel diplomacy purposes much faster. It will allow us to drive analytic output and initial insights much faster. And it will still allow the classified side to accomplish the mission that it needs without slowing that down. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but I think we're starting to go in the right direction.
One more point. So we've talked a lot about data and about technology, but let's not forget the special people who are doing this work. OSINT isn't just going on and Googling or going to your Facebook page or watching RT. I mean, these are people across the IC, and we do work together across the IC, are incredibly specialized and experts. They know every source inside and out. They know the context that needs to be provided to make that source make sense. They help us make the decisions on what are the right sources. They help us get through 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 factor authentication to be able to even see that source. I mean, that's one of the biggest misunderstandings of OSINT. And DIA it was in the press this last week where they talked about how they needed to get out of having OSINT amateurs doing this work and give more of it to the OSINT professionals. And even there, if you read his story, that's a lot of he's talking about is his own analysts, his own warfighters, instead of relying on the OSINT people who are professionals inside of DIA, they were trying to do some of this work on their own. That happens everywhere, and it's something we need to get away from, and we need to understand the specialists of the tradecraft that's used by the individuals who are working this OSINT community as well.
Great comment. Thank you, Randy. If I can pivot for a moment and shift to other countries and competitors and adversaries and what they're doing with open source, any of our panelists care to share any of their observations or experiences as to what our adversaries are using OSINT for against us?
So I think I'll start. The thing that is so disturbing to me as an American citizen and as national security, someone who cares deeply about our national security, is how well China and Russia in particular, but also others, are in this game at speed and volume with massive commitments. So I think actually Recorded Futures wrote a piece on China's cognitive warfare program. So think, in simple terms, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, cognitive warfare. And the whole idea is if they can shift the mindset of our adversary's population it changes the whole space of war. And if we think about the mis and disinformation campaigns that have been coming against us hard and fast for the last 10 years, especially, we're seeing what's happened in our population. I know all of you are sophisticated observers, but the narratives are winning. And so we don't have a counter strategy on that speed and volume that I know of. I'm not cleared for it if it's there. But that piece where it doesn't matter ultimately if it's true. We saw IDF bombs hospital in Gaza, kills 150, came out snap right after it happened. Protests around the world, buildings put on fire, people killed. Well, it turns out it wasn't true. Hamas was brilliant with that bit of mis and disinformation popping it out, and people caught on to it. So we have to figure out how we're going to manage that because, I mean, it's working. It's working for the Chinese. It's working for the Russians. We're not going to be able to put that back in the box, but we have to figure out how we protect our populations. That isn't their solution, right? Which is cutting their populations off from the internet. So within a democracy, that becomes so hard. But I think that's one of the great challenges of our time because it's already reshaping who we are, who America is to the rest of the world, and it's reshaping how we as Americans think about each other.
Staffan, do you care to comment as well?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, as you said, I think disinformation and detecting that and being able to track the roots is of the key importance. We're actually, our heaviest area of investment right now, except from text-based generative AI, is really on image analytics. Because one way to actually track down these campaigns is to actually be able to go to the source when you see these things, to automatically track back to the first posting, because it's spreading like wildfire, with the use of troll factories and all the other tools that they are using. So I think that's one of the key areas to invest in, to be able to detect quickly, but also to go back to the source and be able to block that as quickly as possible. But it's a huge challenge, absolutely.
Perfect. Are there any particular privacy concerns that we should have with regard to the intelligence community's use of open source intelligence, right? There's lots and lots of data out there. Some of it is personal identifying information. What does the IC do to protect that information?
Yeah, so we're actually being very transparent in the work that we're doing in this space, and I think that's one of the things that the more investment, the more focus that we have in the IC on open source intelligence is actually going to allow us to do more in the public domain. It's going to be able to inform and really drive our cooperation and our transparency efforts. That's why we're releasing our policies. That's why we're going to be doing more public engagement in this sense. But I think Randy would echo this. There are no shortage of legal and civil liberties and privacy officers who are supporting us in our work. And we are absolutely committed to making sure that when it comes to information that we're relying on, that we're leveraging, we are handling it in ways that are extremely thorough and that are oftentimes much further along and much more of a template for others to mirror when it comes to how the government uses this type of information.
Good. Anything to add, right?
I would say we have a OSC lawyer who's on our corporate board who's there for every decision we make, and he can quote chapter and verse the Attorney General guidelines that keep us in the right bounds. And as an American citizen, I'm very proud of what we do in protecting the rights of U.S. privacy and U.S. persons.
Staffan, thank you.
I mean, one of the challenges doing this as a global company is, of course, that you had to adhere not only to U.S., but to, gazillions of other regulatory spaces as well. But I'd like to quote our chief legal officer, who made a very good point recently in regards to the European GDPR legislation, that actually, if you look at that legislation, it's impossible for a company to live up to that if they don't do open source intelligence, because the legislation requires you to detect breaches. And how are you going to detect breaches if you're not monitoring what information is leaving your organization? So you have to do this extremely responsibly and keep track of privacy, but it's also a necessity if you're going to live up to privacy regulations.
Great point. Thank you, Staffan. So my last question for our panelists, and I'll be mindful that we have two currently serving U.S. government officials, so they may be a bit constrained in what they can tell us. But I would just ask, as we look ahead to the next U.S. administration, what would be 1-2 recommendations or emphasis areas that you would identify for the future of work in open source intelligence? And Staffan, can we start back with you?
think maybe what we already touched on here, I think to be able to stay ahead of the adversaries, I think we need private-public collaboration. It's the only way to do this, to keep sort of the innovative side of the private sector work together with government with what we can do. And we have our different strengths and weaknesses, but working together, I think, is the only key thing here.
Thank you.
I can say one thing. At the beginning of new administrations, there's often new individuals involved, and they get it very quickly enamored with the more sexy ints. They make movies about spies, and there is even movies about NSA, and you see imagery being used in movies. You don't see a lot of open source intelligence in the multimedia world out there. So we have to help educate them right from the very beginning that the lowest common denominator source, the first source of first resort, the easiest one to collect, you don't need somebody to be a spy to do, you just need to have proper tradecraft, is probably the first place you should go, not the last place you should go. So helping that education of the policymaker is a big part of Jason and I's job.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think back to the beginning of my career a million years ago, early 90s, and the intelligence community could kind of step forward with confidence that when events were breaking around the world, we usually had the first source of real information. And by the end of my career, I can recall distinctly sending analysts home to get on the internet to track Facebook or Twitter or what have you, to actually ascertain what the heck was going on, because we didn't have the intelligence collection necessary to understand elements occurring in the Arab Spring and in other crises. And at the same time, I would be getting phone calls from customers downtown at the NSC or White House, demanding information, and they didn't care necessarily the source of information. They wanted accurate, timely information and insight. And if it came from open source, that was just as good as long as it was accurate and timely.
Yeah.
Great point. Jason.
I think I'll keep it short and sweet and just focus on the value proposition. When you consider the resource constraints that we may be facing over time, regardless of who is leading, I think what is important for people to really focus on is where can we get the greatest return on our investment? Where can we start to make significant inroads, not duplicate what is already being built, probably faster and better outside the walls? How can we bring that in or leverage those capabilities in the commercial and private sector in ways that allow us to accomplish what we want to accomplish faster and sometimes better, and for a cheaper cost in aggregate? And I think the open source community and open source intelligence offers a lot of that. And so I think there's a great opportunity for folks to come in over the next couple of years and really pick up where the current team is, because I've been very proud with how the DNI and DCIA were very open to the idea of putting out the strategy and really talked about how important it was. I think if we can build on that and someone can then take the ball and run with it, I think there's a huge opportunity for growth there.
Thank you, Jason.
Yeah.
Kristin?
I would just add, I think the vast majority of the intelligence community, actually the national security community, is built around clearances, secrets, classified data, and it's a fraction of it that's focused on the open source work. But as we've described here today, that open world, the volume is exponentially increasing. And so we need a new paradigm. So for the next administration, I would just say, focus on what you want it to be able to do based on all the things that are possible and resource it accordingly. I think the other thing is it's an opportunity for a transformation in how we view that public-private work together. It has to be less transactional, contract and contract, that it has to be much more of a relationship. Because I can think of 300 companies easily that would want to contribute to this, that have vital contribution on the art of the narrative to biotech to whatever it is, and their own deep expertise, not only in their open source, but their field of interest, needs to be available to government at speed and volume. And so there's a paradigm shift that has to happen. I don't know if that's some kind of an In-Q-Tel-like model or something else, but we can just start talking about it and iterate to what it is. But I think that's how we win in the future and start taking back some of the disadvantages we're at right now.
Thank you. And thank you to each of you for joining us today for this conversation on open source intelligence. We really appreciate the time and the insight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.